This is Climate Watch. I'm Zhao Ying. Welcome to the show. A UN report declares that the world has entered an era of global water bankruptcy with irreversible consequences. Published by the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health, the report titled Global Water Bankruptcy, Living Beyond Our Hydrological Means in a Post-Crisis Era, says many societies have been using water faster than nature can replenish it. As a result, 3/4 of the global population now live in countries classified as water insecure or critically water insecure. Nearly 4 billion people face water scarcity for at least 1 month every year. The report suggests that the global situation is so severe that old terms like water crisis or water stress simply don't capture the full magnitude anymore. Then what does a global water bankruptcy really mean? Why is it happening? And can we restructure this debt before it's too late? Joining us now is Changhua. She is the president of Global Climate Academy and chair of Governing Council of Asia Pacific Water Forum. Dr. Wu, it's great to have you on our show.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, can you explain this term, water bankruptcy? What does that really mean?
Well, water bankruptcy describes when human water withdrawals and impacts exceed the renewable supply and the natural storage of freshwater sources in terms of both the income, like annual river flow and the rainfall, as well as the savings, like aquifers, glaciers, and wetlands. It means not just shortages, but systematic depletion and degradation, such that the resource basis cannot sustain the current demand. The concept itself actually mirrors the financial bankruptcy, meaning you've spent not only your income, but also your savings. So indicators such as rivers that no longer reach the sea, shrinking lakes, and aquifers are dropping faster than they can recharge. So globally at this moment, more than 4 billion people experience water scarcity at least 1 month a year. This pretty much underpins the notion of the structural limits actually being exceeded.
Yeah, so this isn't just a regional problem. It is described as a global one. Why should we understand water bankruptcy as a worldwide phenomenon instead of just a collection of local water shortages?
Well, water systems supply not only local population, of course, we all being somewhere on this planet, we rely on local supplies, water supply systems there, but also they supply the interconnected economies and food systems versus agriculture trade, urban supply chains, transboundary rivers. They all weave local stress into the global impact. So, the local stress, water bankruptcy experience in different parts on this planet somehow through all those systems, connected to each other. So that turns into a global impact. For example, the water scarcity in the Indus Basin affects global rice markets. The depletion in the Colorado River in the U.S. impacts energy, agriculture, and urban supplies across about 7 U.S. states, at least in the central west part of the country. Globally, nearly 75% of the population lives in water insecure countries, showing basically how pervasive the stress has become. From Asia Pacific perspective and the Asia Water Development Outlook 2025, championed by Asian Development Bank and Asia Pacific Water Forum, also underscores that massive water insecurity improvements across our region, where about, 2.7 billion people have been already lifted from extreme water insecurity in recent years, remain fragile and under threat from ecosystem decline, government deficits, and financing gaps there, meaning progress is made so far, but somehow we could potentially actually being brought back to the water insecurity situation because of the current global water bankruptcy conditions.
Yeah, and also notably, the report emphasizes that this bankruptcy is irreversible. Why is it so?
Well, we all experience like short-term droughts, right? They come and go. But water bankruptcy refers to the permanent loss of the natural buffers there versus deep aquifers that took millennia to form are pumped faster than they can recharge. Glaciers that feed rivers seasonally are disappearing. Wetlands that store and purify water are converted or drained. These losses change the hydrological cycles and also ecological functions in ways that cannot simply be reversed with the rain's return. So the natural savings account I mentioned actually about versus glaciers, wetlands, and aquifers, when they're gone and they're not just temporarily depleted, it means the structural foundation for water security is eroded. That is why, in most cases, it's irreversible.
Well, you mentioned aquifers, wetlands, and glaciers. Why are these reservoirs so critical? I mean, maybe for people living in Beijing or Shanghai, things like glaciers are far away from us, but it also affects us when they're lost, right?
Yeah, well, in a sort of research term, particularly in the current sort of water bankruptcy conditions there, these systems are called our savings account, right? They provide the seasonal buffering, storage, filtration, and ecosystem support. For instance, aquifers actually, they sustain dry season irrigation and drinking water. Wetlands, they filter pollutants, mitigate floods, and sustain biodiversity. Glaciers regulate flow in dry months for major rivers in Asia and the Andes, like the Yangtze River in particular. Their loss leads to greater variability in supply, contamination, ground sinking, as well as ecosystem collapse. So they are turning the temporary seasonal shortages into permanent deficits, and we all feel it. So no matter how far away glaciers are, particularly living in Shanghai, if you look at the glaciers, they are in the, Tibetan plateaus there. It seems very far away, but we feel it. We feel the permanent deficit there. So the global depletion of groundwater and the disappearance of lakes and glaciers are pretty much measurable in many basins already, including the we call it the third polar region actually, the Tibetan Qinghai Tibetan plateaus there. We already witnessed experience much accelerated melting of the glaciers there, which are going to impact actually billions of people population in Asia and the Pacific region.
Yeah, and also the report suggests that even where water appears sufficient on paper, pollution makes much of it unusable. So, how significant is this factor in driving water bankruptcy?
Well, if water is polluted, what does that mean? That means actually the water is not effectively usable anymore, right? So even though, yes, from volume perspective, there seems to be still a lot of water, but because they are polluted, so they are not usable. So industrial pollution, untreated sewage, agricultural runoffs mean that where quantity looks adequate on paper, but much of the water actually must be treated before they can be used. In most cases, that means actually at higher cost before we can use the water. So in Asia, for instance, despite improvements in access to basic like water access, sanitation, and health and hygiene, we still have billions of people living in economies struggling with water quality, ecosystem protection, and hazard vulnerability, meaning the quality constraints remain a major driver of water security, not only in Asia, but in many parts of the world.
And agriculture uses the lion's share of fresh water, and much of it comes from declining aquifers. Why has farming become such a dominant factor in water bankruptcy? And how does water bankruptcy, in return, threaten our global food security?
Well, unfortunately, agriculture consumes the majority of the fresh water on this planet. You probably often see the numbers like it's around 70, even more of the fresh water on this planet is used to irrigate crops for an expanding population. groundwater depletion in major agricultural hubs, like parts of India and the US high plains, they directly undermines production. So underwater bankruptcy conditions there, yields fall, food prices rise, and the food security for billions is threatened, especially in areas like South Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa there. Can we do something about it? Definitely. There are solutions such as, we can choose less water intensive crops, modern irrigations like drip systems, and improved soil moisture monitoring. They all can help reduce the water use. In some cases, actually, it could be, down by 20 to 40%. That's a lot. That's going to be a really important part of the solution. So they are technically feasible, but definitely require investment, policy support, and also farmer adoption at a scale so that we can align with the themes being discussed in global water dialogues leading up to this year, actually December, the UN will convene. It's the third UN Water Forum, and in March 2027 in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, the 11th World Water Forum will be convened. So globally, actually, the global community started to get together to really, bring all the resources, energy, and intelligence as well to focus on those critical issues, so that we'll be able to find solutions, and particular to address actually some governance policy gaps.
Yes, really looking forward to that. And also, the report identifies several hotspots like the Middle East and North Africa, South Asia, the US Southwest. Can you walk us through some of these regions and explain why they are at the leading edge of water bankruptcy?
Sure. Those are the few regions identified in this recent UN report as the hotspot, regions hotspots on this planet. In Middle East and North Africa, extreme aridity, high dependency on non-renewable groundwater, and rapid urbanization have been amplifying the scarcity. That's, with the data evidence actually, proven that already. In South Asia, high population density, intense irrigation demands, and seasonal monsoons create imbalances between supply and demand. That's very obvious. If you look at the US, in particular Southwest, prolonged drought and over allocations of river water, particularly represented by the Colorado River, really strain the reservoirs and groundwater. So their data evidence cases basically made the point that they are among the top front in terms of the hotspots on this planet in the water bankruptcy conditions there. So these regions face combined pressure of climate change, demographic growth, and the legacy water management decisions there. Their struggles are emblematic of systematic limits rather than isolated anomalies. And we do need to focus on those cases so that we'll be able to learn from the lessons and in order to address the global challenge.
Yeah, so do you believe there are some similarities among these places, despite their different geographical or economic situation?
Pretty much so. Actually, a lot of people these days, because we all talk about the climate change issues there. So definitely climate change has become a major amplifiers of the water scarcity, particularly through heat waves, altered rainfall, and glaciers melting. But really fundamentally at the root cause level, governance deficit, our consumption patterns, development choices, when we, not adequate in attention and investment given to address those sort of water scarcity issues there. I think that's been very well recognized, understood these days, backed up by data and evidence. So in order to address the situations there, definitely common everywhere, actually, that's going to require reform. Because otherwise we cannot possibly address those issues there. So generally talking about actually, I think, governance deficit and our consumption patterns, as well as the policy, sort of a mismatch, So we do need to figure out how to address them, not only at locally, but somehow bring them up to the global level, particularly this year and next year, 2026, 2027, particularly through the UN, the global platforms, so that we'll be able to really understand, how to mobilize like the finance, governance, as well as cooperation as the tools for dialogues and collaborations.
And you suggested that this is not just a water crisis report, but a reflection on the failure of the underlying logic of global development. Explain to us what is that logic and why do you believe it failed?
Well, the conventional logic is that in our development model, we treat water as an abundant input to growth. Something we see water as something to be engineered around rather than conserved within ecological limits. So that logic assumed that infrastructure and technology could indefinitely expand supply. But so far this has failed as the natural systems are now over withdrawn. I think that's pretty much the fact. So we do need to shift to a new logic, particular adopting a systems approach that recognizes water as a finite, integrates nature-based solutions like wetlands restorations, groundwater recharges. We do need to foster demand-side management, and the circularity there, and mobilize innovative financing. All these themes actually are scheduled for deeper discussion, and not only at national level, local level, but also at a regional and a global levels there, so that you started to see like water finance, innovation for water, water for humans, natures, all those themes are being elevated actually to the global level. So hopefully somehow we'll be able to share experiences, best practices, and join up efforts and innovation, and really find the solutions in order to somehow convert this sort of bankruptcy situation into sort of profit making.
Okay. Well, the cities like Kabul, Mexico City, Tehran, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, they are cited as examples where development has actually continued despite clear water limits. What happens when a major modern city just runs out of water? And do you think there could be a point at which urban expansion should just stop?
I think that's a sort of a given. What's encouraging is that all the cities, large and small, more and more cities start to experience this water bankruptcy situations there. So the level of awareness exists today, and there are many innovations, innovative policy makings, financing models, investing in infrastructure, all started to shift to focus on those issues there. Of course, for a long time, this is sort of constraining dimension. It's not like we can expand, urban development as much as we want. We are constrained by the physical world there, by water in particular. So urban planning these days actually definitely has this water cord way of thinking. In China, there's something we call like, when we there's a four dimensions of water deciding and making the decisions, including urban development, where when we decide where to put people, particularly in the urban context there, water is among the top priority or indicators there. We need to make sure in the matrix, using that to evaluate the capacity, carrying capacity before we make further decisions there. I think that's becoming more and more mainstream. But in terms of the large cities facing the challenges there, that's pretty much more like the legacy issue, right? Meaning because the inadequate attention paid to those issues in the past, that's why we were where we stand today in terms of the water bankruptcy conditions there. And now we do need to figure out how to address that. So there are options there. For instance, we started to use pricing water. Basically, so there is a price for water. The more you consume, actually, the more you need to pay. And for instance, there is a sort of polluters pay principles there in terms of policy perspective, meaning if you pollute water, you need to pay for treatment. And there, in many cases, it could be penalized actually for that. In the meantime, we need to invest in infrastructure, right? And you started to look at wastewater treatment, water supply, and investing in ecosystem. So rather than just simply looking at the water supply demand side, so there's a much expanded scope in terms of, the role of nature, uh, you know, uh, uh, even people's behavior, the public awareness, consumers' behavior change, whatever. So that's where I see the signs of hope. Meaning, yes, we live in large cities. We're already constrained by water, bankruptcy already, but somehow there are ways of doing that. Of course, there are other cases where, I think in some regions around the world, people are already talking about
Yeah.
relocation, right? Relocate the cities away from the current stress towards other regions there. In that sort of a scenario, we still need to make sure water constraining factor is well built into the planning of the new development areas actually for the relocation of capital. If not, then we'll continue to fail.
Yeah, since you mentioned this relocation, actually we often hear a term called day zero. What does that really mean?
That day we run out of water. And there are already the data and the evidence cases actually in this world already. There are cities literally say certain number of days, we literally ran out of water. That also adds the sense of alert and emergency, urgency and emergency, meaning it's already a reality in the current water bankruptcy situation. So water security, water issues has to be elevated really to the top level of attention so that all the key players, the government, the private sector, society, you name it, will be able to act together to prevent cases like that from happening.
So when day zero arrives, there's no other option but to relocate.
I wouldn't really to simplify that way,
Okay.
but somehow that, because the hydrological cycle still, probably will suffer for a certain number of days without water, with a very, extreme water stress. But then hopefully somehow we will change from my side to actions to policies, everything, so that we'll be able to prevent cases happening in that situation. So we can still remain in where we are, where our home is, but somehow really everyone acts together to manage water so that we'll be able to be stuck in that sort of situation.
Okay. And you described China as both the practitioner of engineering-driven water management and one of the first countries to encounter its limits. Can you help us understand those limits and how is China coping with such limits?
Well, China has been really well known actually for engineering capability. So we pretty much rely on infrastructure like dams,
Mhm.
like water transfers, large scale projects there to manage water. But we all recognize actually limits already appeared in for instance, particularly in the northern part of the country where the northern aquifers actually are declining. The interregional imbalances are pretty much tough at this moment. And of course, in the parts of the country, we're still suffering from pollutions there. So in response to the situation, besides the conventional way, like engineering driven water management, so China started to shift it's a strategic focus there as well. For instance, the government definitely has been increasing the water pricing reform, wastewater reuse, more stricter allocation. Basically, because we're constrained. So all these attempts actually are aimed to shift from supply expansion to demand side management, rather than say, okay, we just supply more and more water, which is constrained by particularly now the water bankrupt situation, but rather taking advantage of technology and also actually mobilize people to change behaviors there and policy incentives actually for different industries actually to save water with this pricing signal so that we'll be able to better manage the demand side there as well. So all these are reflecting the shift away from the older logic, basically more like engineering driven sort of management, water management model, and more towards a nature-based solution. We call it a nature-based, circular, regenerative sort of a model there. That's pretty much being mainstreamed at this moment.
Okay. But when water shortages become permanent rather than temporary, and when there simply isn't enough water to meet everyone's needs, do water risk becoming a driver of conflict? Or do you believe this scarcity could instead catalyze regional cooperation?
Well, scarcity definitely escalates disputes. We've seen that witness actually learned from history already, and particularly in this case of over transboundary basins there. So that has been learned actually. But in the meantime, we also learn from history that shared water risks can also catalyze cooperation. For example, the joint commissions on shared rivers. For us actually in the region for the Mekong River, this commission. Right. If you look at other river basins, particular transponder like the Danube, like in the U.S. actually, if you look at the U.S. Mexico there as well. So that has been recognized as a common practice, way to address the potential conflicts actually over the shared waters there. The evolving global architecture, though, including this year's sort of global dialogues, regional dialogues. Now we do need to figure out actually how to seek or build common frameworks actually for cooperation, finance, and diplomacy in order to avoid conflict. Even though we learned from the lessons, successes, and failures from history, we all know the inadequacy, the weakness actually of current practices there. And with the current water bankruptcy situation, and we all know for sure there will be more conflicts if we do not figure out how to build commonly shared, accepted or common sense frameworks for cooperation. We're going to fail in a very, very dire manner.
And you suggest that Asia Pacific now has the chance to move from being the global water crisis hotspot to potentially the engine of global water security solutions. Why the Asia Pacific, and what do you believe makes this region uniquely positioned to play such an important role?
Well, I chair the governing council of Asia Pacific Water Forum. So you could imagine, big part of my professional life these days actually is dedicated to the water security issue for the Asia Pacific region. On one side, through the regional research, data, and also global studies, we definitely the region is probably facing the unfortunately very dire sort of water scarcity situation. The importance lies in the fact. So Asia and the Pacific region account house about 60% of global population, and it's very diverse. So yes, on one side, actually, the challenges are massive, right? And as all the data demonstrated already. But in the meantime, if you look at on the solution part, if you look at the innovation and governance momentum, that's really, really encouraging because from Asia Pacific Water Forum's perspective, we've been working with the different countries, different regions, different partners, trying to figure out actually how to learn from each other through the best practices, through partnerships, collaborations to really enhance the governance of finance, science, and innovation there as well. So yes, on one side, I think the region overall has achieved major progresses by lifting 2.7 billion people out of extreme water insecurity through targeted investment and the policy reforms. That's given. But I mentioned early on, if we fail, if we slow the actions or stop any further investment, we're going to go back. The progress will be, turned the other way around. And so in our region, if you look at the different countries, we do have, like Japan, Singapore, South Korea, more advanced, advanced economies. They've been really investing, talents, skills, technologies, even financing models, including digital AI technologies to address the water security issues. If you look at large economies like China and India, we are experimenting with it for integrated water planning, data, finance mechanisms. But somehow, in that context, there we also looking into the future, into the coming decades. We know for sure we need to invest more into the water security there. I think number shows through 2040 for the region overall, we need to close a financing gap of about $4 trillion. In order to ensure the water security. That can somehow manage the current water bankruptcy situation, but also moving forward with the enhanced resilience and the water security there. So the region's role is increasingly recognized in the global governance dialogue. So we've been sharing with the global community, with other regions there. But in the meantime, we need to also to learn from other regions there as well. As I mentioned earlier on, 2026, 2027 will literally mark another milestone at the global level in terms of addressing the water bankruptcy crisis there through the UN Water Forum, Water Conference, through the World Water Forum in the Middle East, both. And somehow through those sort of engagement dialogues and also through those key stakeholders actually coming together, we'll be able to build up more political wills and also converging more resources and expertise so that we'll be able to somehow collectively address this water bankruptcy situation.
Yes, before it's too late. Thank you, Dr. Wu. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And that wraps up this edition of Climate Watch. You can find more episodes on your favorite podcast platforms. Just search for Climate Watch and hit subscribe. Don't forget to leave us a quick review or share it with a friend. You can also email us at radio@cgtn.com with your questions or feedback. And stay updated on the latest climate stories with our Substack newsletter, Climate Choices. I'm Zhao Ying. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time.